grief is just love that can't be expressed anymore.
The loss, the grief, it doesn't go away.
To know that my words may have had an impact on him, or, the way that I treated him probably had an impact on him negatively when he was already going through the hardest point in his life, that hurts me.
I think he really was kind of scared, actually, of what was going on with him. It is my opinion that the road to recovery and health is not a one size fits all. I gave him two choices. You can go to inpatient rehab while you take this time off, or we're going to get you in to start seeing a therapist. In addition to seeing a therapist, I need you to go to a psychiatrist.
We were starting to see the Eric that we knew come back.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going.
Okay, guys, we're back. We are in episode 9. Like, can you believe we've done 9 episodes already? It's crazy
Well, I
because we
remember
literally.
I remember when you first were like, "Hey, I'm ready now. We're going to do this podcast thing." And that was like feels like forever ago now. Like we've been doing
But
this
literally,
for like I mean, even prior to us actually recording anything. I mean,
yeah.
it's been almost half a year that we've been working on all this stuff.
Well,
We
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 started
started
talking about the idea about 3 years ago.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like when we actually started really looking into it and like getting ready and like starting
Getting
to record,
ready.
getting all the
Yep.
stuff prepped. That was what,
Mhm.
like March, April I think it was March that we were like, okay, let's do
Something
this.
like that. Yeah, and then
And then all of
now
that prep
we're
work, the full month and a half before we actually even recorded the
yeah.
first episode.
Yeah. Now we're in our rhythm. It's been like a month and a half of uploading episodes, and
More
we're
than
already on
that,
like,
we're in August. We started in May.
oh, you're right. Feels like a lot less time.
Yeah.
Anyways, 9 episodes. This is number 9. And I think what I wanted to start with, what we kind of talked about going into this episode, was wanting to talk to you guys, listeners, watchers, and the people who are supporting us. And we're kind of at this point in the podcast where pretty soon we are going to be done wrapping up this story and kind of, like we've said at the beginning, we have some intentions and some driving forces behind why we want to share this story and why it's so important to us, why we want to be raw and vulnerable and real about all of the stuff that comes with this type of situation. Um However, so we still have, a handful of episodes. Believe it or not, episode 9, we still have a handful of episodes coming because we've backtracked to give you some context leading up
Yeah.
to Erick's death.
About
And
this,
so,
yeah, about this particular story that inspired us to even start this in the first place, and that we wanted to talk about in our
right.
experiences. We still have, uh, you know, quite a few things to talk about in terms of what happened after his death, or why he died, what happened in the aftermath of that, and even
Yep.
just all of the things that people don't think about you deal with after a death like that. We still have
Absolutely.
plenty of things to talk about in our experiences with all of those
Exactly.
things.
I mean, we even haven't gotten to the point of like, we still have to talk about me starting to date, the whole, getting remarried thing and all of that, how that impacted you. So we're not done with the journey yet around the story of losing, Erick, what happened as it unfolded. This last handful of episodes, we've taken you back in time before he died to give context to the traumatic nature of the things that had happened right before he died, which made his death even more traumatic for us. And So, what I want to talk to you guys who are listening and watching us about is that Isaac and I are very aware of the fact that we have a unique relationship in terms of parent child, mother, son. Uh, and it's not something that you commonly see. Not that we're like the only people that have these types of relationships. I know there are lots of people that have really good relationships with their children, but I think in the podcasting space, there's not like a ton of people who are doing what we do in terms of having these like really raw, open, deep discussions about, really personal topics and challenging topics that are full of stigma. And so what we're essentially coming and asking a call to action for you guys is we're starting to think about, okay, we're getting to this point where we're going to be wrapping up season 1. We still have several episodes, don't worry. We're not done yet. But beyond that, we want to continue to expand the podcast. We're enjoying it. Obviously, we're getting good feedback. I think that we have several different ideas of how we'd like to take this forward. Obviously, this season was a very purposeful season. It was telling our story, it was telling Erick's story. It's about a specific thing that we feel really strongly that is important for people to know. Um, we also have an interesting like dynamic between the two of us. And so I do think that there's a lot of different directions that we could take this podcast. Uh, we could go topical with the two of us, discussing specific types of topics related to like mental health or grief or loss or trauma or
We've talked about
actually anything
having
else.
Right. We've
Go
talked
ahead.
about having guests on,
Yeah.
especially different various professionals and things. We've had a few people reach out to us and say that they would like to be on our podcast to either share their personal story because they resonate with what we've been talking about, or even, psychotherapists and doctors and certain things to talk about some
I
of those
also
various issues that we've touched on.
Yeah, would I also have some ideas around some people that I find very interesting in touching on the topic of resiliency, because I do think that that's one of the
Hmm.
things about Isaac and I that is a little bit unique, is that we're very resilient people. Clearly, because we're very openly discussing this extremely difficult subject and traumatic period in our life. And um, so the call to action for us is this is what we need from you guys. If you're at this episode, you're on episode 9. Chances are you've been following the podcast, right? You've been listening to the episodes, you've been coming along this journey with us. You clearly find some value in it. If this is the first episode you've listened to and you're enjoying it when we get past this part, um you're going to want to go back to the beginning and start at the beginning. So, what we need from you for us to be able to figure out where to take this podcast after we're done with this story is, well, first of all, we need you to share the podcast. So if you're enjoying, and I say that loosely because obviously the topic that we're talking about is a heavy topic. It's not an enjoyable topic. But if you're enjoying the
If you're
dynamic,
resonating Yeah, if you're resonating with what we're talking about, with us being open and honest about our experiences with these things, if they have helped you or you think they're going to help somebody else that you might know,
yeah,
yeah, please
we need
share
you to share.
with. Yeah.
And the easiest way for you guys to share our podcast is to share it on your social media. Like I think almost everybody and their brother has some sort of social media. So share it. Tell your friends about it. We want this story to get out because we do feel like there are some very important things that, again, as the story continues to unfold, will come full circle for you. So sharing. The other thing that we need from you is whatever platform that you're listening on. So if it's YouTube, subscribe. Like our episodes, each episode, like it. put a comment in the comment box. Those are things that help us get traction so that this is made visible to other people. If you're listening in a podcasting platform like Spotify or Apple, um, you know, again, like the show, follow it,
Leave a
rate
review.
it, give it a rating, leave a review. And if you don't have the ability to leave a review in that way, or comment in any way, go to our social media pages, um, and leave your comments there. The other
Mhm.
thing that you can do to help us is tell us what you want from us going into season 2. um, do you want us to go topically and talk about specific topics? And if so, what topics are you interested in hearing him and I discuss? If you want to have a mixture of us also talking with guests, what type of guests are you interested in hearing from? Um, is there something in any of these episodes? And as we continue to do episodes where you're like, oh my goodness, I want them to dig into that a little bit more or give us more insight about that particular topic as it relates to them or their experience or how they view it. So we need that feedback so that we can start to plan that out and figure out what that looks like. And so, how you can do that is again, if you're on YouTube, in this episode, put your comments in the comment section. Give us the ideas. What do you want to see after we finish telling this story and we start season 2? If you are in another podcasting app, go to our social media. We will be posting a post on our Instagram and our Facebook, our TikTok. Yeah, those are the
That's
3 I think we
that's
have.
it. Yeah.
Um, and we will just have a post here that says, leave your comments below. Give us ideas of what you want us to talk about. So
We'll
when this
even leave
episode
our.
drops,
I was gonna say we're even gonna leave our email, our
yes,
podcast email in the description
our,
as well. So if you want to email us
exactly.
directly or talk to us directly, you can do that as well.
Ab- Absolutely. So again, we're really enjoying this, and we have ideas for how to take this beyond the story when the story is done and how to evolve from there. But we want to get your feedback, and again, the more that this is shared, the more that this is liked and commented on, the more exposure it gets, the more people who might benefit from what we've experienced. So, if you can share this podcast, you just go to the link tree. It's a link in every episode, every description. There's a link, and you can just share it. Share the link, has all the podcast info. We are like working on a website. It's almost done. So that'll eventually get updated. But on your social media, if you just help us out, I guess. So that's our call to action for you guys. Um, and before we jump in, there's 2 more things I want to touch on. As you can tell, for those who watch the podcast on either Spotify or YouTube, I am often wearing It's Going merch. So like this hoodie you've seen in the video a couple times. I have my little It's Going coffee cup. Sometimes it's coffee, sometimes it's water, sometimes it might be wine. Um, we have various things. There's a reason behind this. Obviously, it's in our link tree. If you guys find the humor behind how's it going, it's going. We have a few different versions of that. In our We have a shop, so you can buy it. It helps the podcast, it supports it. If you have the same type of humor we do in terms of the saying, or you just want to support our podcast, go check it out. Um, the reason I'm always wearing it is because the one thing I didn't want to have to do is figure out what I was going to wear in video every single time we recorded our podcast, because you have to think about copyright and intellectual property, and like you can't. That's why they blur things out in like reality TV shows. Like if you don't have specific sponsors, you got to be careful what shows up on camera. Well, we own this. So if I look like I'm wearing the same thing every day, uh I am for the podcast because it just makes my life easier. But if you like any of it, it's comfy and it's not that expensive. So, you can check it out and help us out. That supports the podcast. Um, did I miss anything on that, Isaac? I think that's
Well, and also just in terms of the call to action kind of thing, if you guys have any suggestions or things um, for the merch, like eventually we'll come out with some different designs and stuff in the future as well as we
yeah.
progress in the podcast. So feel free to throw some suggestions our way for things that you would want or
Well, and I
need.
think too that as we grow and as people continue to share this podcast, as we build a community, I think it would be awesome to have a Facebook group or a Patreon or, something of that nature where we're able to have more access to a group of people to discuss and have a community surrounding some of these more challenging topics that are harder to discuss and things that people deal with regularly. Um, and so, as with any friendship community group of people, sometimes you get some inside jokes. Sometimes you develop your own phrases. And so, yeah, I mean, the merch would evolve, but we also can do that with your help as well. So those are the ways that you can interact with us that we would love. We really would love your ideas as far as how you would like to see us take this podcast forward. We had a very specific intention for this first season, but we have many different directions we could take it going into season 2. And we just want to know what you guys think, like what you want to see. We can also do, I, this is a very serious topic for us, and so we're talking about some very raw and deep and vulnerable things, but, like, Isaac and I also have, our own sense of humor and banter, and, sometimes we have some good debates on things too, so, I mean, literally, you just give us ideas. Tell us what you wanna see, and if you're like, "Love the story, we just wanted to hear the story, and, like, we don't really care if you podcast after that," then, like, you can share that with us too. That's what we wanna
Yeah.
know.
Um, Yeah, and then beyond that, I think the only other thing we wanted to touch on briefly before we get back into the meat of things and the story as it continues, is we've had some people kind of ask us or wonder, how we're able to talk about a lot of these deep, dark topics that are very close to home and be vulnerable with you guys about our story without, you know, uh, being having emotional reaction it seems on camera or like being unaffected by it and obviously that's not true. We are
Yeah.
affected by it as we go through this process. It has been I mean, it's helped us process a bit, but even learning about each other's experiences a little bit more because it's not like we haven't talked about a lot of these topics before and gone very in depth with each other. I mean,
For
literally for the
years and
last
years and
five
years.
years, we've gone over these stories over and over and over again, just trying to process things and piece things together and put, all of the different uh, bits of information that we've received into some sort of story that makes sense as to why things went down the way that they did. Um, and it's been a long and emotional process. And even now, a lot of the things that we talk to do affect us. But on camera and like for the podcast, we want to do this in a very strategic and helpful manner that we are very purposeful with. So um, we it's not as though these topics don't affect us as we talk about them. Oftentimes, that just happens off camera, and especially, I
Mhm.
think, you can talk about this a bit more too. But especially in our line of work, we've had to learn how to compartmentalize, and uh, certain things so that you can be on and like do your job in one manner and then you can deal with the aftermath and the emotions and all of those things later.
Yeah.
Like working in the emergency room, you can't
Mhm.
you can't be emotional when serious things are happening. You have to manage that crisis, and so I think both of us have kind of learned how to that there's a time and a place to be able to um you know break down and process and have those levels of emotions. Um, and sometimes that's not, on camera.
Yeah, I think the last couple of episodes, there's been a couple of moments where you can tell that things get a little bit shaky for us. There are things that hit me and hit Isaac differently based on our own personal experiences. I think um for me, not only being emergency room, Isaac's absolutely right. Like, could you imagine having a life threatening situation happening and having all your nurses and your doctors like freaking out and having an
Would
emotional breakdown when
You
you
got
went
to
into
keep
the
calm under
emergency room?
pressure. Yeah, you got to
Yeah,
keep
so
calm under
like
pressure.
it is it is a skill set that you develop, to be able to compartmentalize. For me personally, I also like we've talked about this before. I grew up in an environment where I had to emotionally compartmentalize in order to, I guess, survive the chaos, right? Um, it's Isaac and I both, and Isaac can talk about his, but like I've done a lot of work over my lifetime therapeutically, um, even prior to Eric dying, on addressing how to manage my emotions, how to even access my emotions. For a long time, my emotions were very cut off. Um, it's been a long journey. I've been actively in therapy for a very long time, specifically a therapy that is very, very helpful in dealing with any sort of trauma is called EMDR therapy. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And we'll link it in the show notes below so you can check it out. But it's something that I was doing prior to Eric dying. It's something that I did have done and continue to do extensively since Eric died. I've done some other therapeutic things. They've all been um, necessary. So, like Isaac said, we've spent a lot of time working on and processing and working through our grief, not only with each other, but in our own therapeutic settings with our therapists. Um, I know for myself, and again, I'll let Isaac talk about his experience, but I eventually went to see a psychiatrist. Year 2 was literally like the worst year. Leading up to the second year anniversary of Eric's death, I've never ever in my life experienced something so awful and difficult in my life. I've never had that type of anxiety before. I would say I probably dealt with mild depression. uh, I literally just kind of checked out of life for that year. And so, in addition to therapy, I mean, I eventually got to a point where I decided I needed to be on medication too. And so, we've done that, or I've done that, been on medication. Specifically, another recommendation I make is going to a psychiatrist versus your general practitioner. If you're looking to get on any sort of mental health medications, anti anxiety meds, antidepressants. And I say that um, just in the sense that, and I get that psychiatry is it's very difficult to get an appointment sometimes. They're getting better now with like the pandemic. There was a lot of things switched over to telehealth, so things are a lot more
Yeah.
accessible.
I would
Um,
say I would say the importance of that versus your family
mhm,
doctor, the good analogy, and I don't remember if I've said this on the podcast already or not, but it's similar to like, if you have a problem, with your plumbing in your house,
mhm,
you can get a general contractor to come fix it, but they're not going to do as good a job as a plumber who's specialized for the job. And
right,
so like you can think of in the medical field, there's different specialties for different doctors. There's emergency, there's critical care, there's surgery, there's all sorts of different, and even within like surgery and stuff, there's hand surgeons, and then there's cardiac surgeons, and then there's neurosurgeons, and all of them are specialized for a reason because each one of those things is so complicated. And so mental health is an extreme, and mental health drugs specifically are very complicated to
Very
get them right.
complicated.
And so yeah, you can go to your general doctor and get something, and they have, they have a basic tool list and things that they will prescribe, and but they're not going to do as good of a job helping you in your situation specifically as a specialist being a psychiatrist who is trained specifically in mental health type stuff.
Yeah, and
So
I think, yeah, specifically psychiatrists too, is that so your general practitioner, if you're dealing like with mild forms of anxiety or just like a really mild form of depression, it just kind of popped up. Going to your general practitioner and starting out to get on something, the family doctors are family doctors because they know a little bit about everything. So they can kind of address a little bit about everything. So if you're dealing with something that's super mild, yeah, go talk to your primary doctor. They might start you on something. It might be
they might
helpful.
refer you to a
I
psychiatrist.
um Unfortunately, I think what happens a lot with mental health medications, because it is not a one size fits all. There are a lot of different types of medication, and they all work um differently for different people. Is that sometimes people go to their general practitioners to get on like antidepressants or something to help with their anxiety, and they're like, this doesn't work. Well, that's stupid. No, I'm not going to go on medication. Um, because it can be a process, and sometimes you might not get it right the first time. However, your chances of getting the right combination of medications right the first time increase by going to see a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor who specializes in psychiatric or medications that are for mental health conditions. So they are the experts of all uh, medications related to mental health.
Yeah, and I think, obviously that's an important role for people who are confused about that. But back to the topic that we were talking about in terms of
Yeah,
like our abilities to talk about these things that are very vulnerable and near and dear to us. As you said, I mean, you've talked about some of the work that you've personally done. I've done the same thing. We've on this podcast, we've preached a lot about healthy coping mechanisms and doing and
yeah,
being very passionate about mental health. And honestly, for me personally, at least, part of the reason why I'm so passionate about mental health is because I've seen firsthand what it does when you neglect it. In this exact story with my dad, and
yeah.
so
And I've seen it
and so
beyond
as a
that.
result
Yeah,
of that, and you have helped me through a lot of these with these resources and stuff and taught me a lot about these things. But yeah, I mean, I've done my own work on myself, therapy, EMDR, same thing. Uh I've had my stint of being on mental health meds and stuff, and a lot of times I think a lot of times people think that medication is going to fix it, and it doesn't. That's not how
no,
that works. What it does is it makes whatever you're dealing with more easy or easier to deal with, easier to bear, so that you can actually function enough to focus on the deeper problems. So, like with anxiety or depression, they're often sourced in a much deeper problem within your life, whether it be past trauma or whether it be certain habits that you have, or all of those sorts of things. And if you struggle with depression or anxiety, they can make them very difficult. Those things in and of themselves can make it very difficult to actually deal with the source of the problem. And so medications can oftentimes help you function enough to where you can start doing that work. Once you've
right,
done the work, though, and you've processed a lot of those things, it's a lot easier to deal with once you've found those healthy coping mechanisms and you've integrated them into your daily life or whatever. So, like when it comes to all of this and talking about all this, we wouldn't be. Uh, we do practice what we preach when it comes to
yeah,
mental health stuff. We talk about this stuff because it works and because it's worked for us, and that's why part of why we wanted to share this story in the first place is, you know, we've dealt with grief, we've dealt with trauma, we've dealt with loss, we've dealt with all of these things, and yet we've still managed to be resilient and still managed to come out with a positive outlook because we've learned ways to cope healthily and ways that really do work. And not a lot of people really understand how these things work. And so, you
Yeah.
know, because we've not only been through it, but we've learned about it from a medical standpoint within our jobs and that sort of thing,
Mhm.
it's something that we feel we can talk about and hopefully help other people with.
We have a unique perspective, and then, I have a longer history of just dealing with family trauma and things like that as well. So, like, you know, uh since I've been your age, I've been working on my mental health and emotional health. It's been a very big driving force in my life to make sure that I myself was emotionally healthy, um, as your mother, because that all affects everybody, and I wanted to be. I think too, my motto in life has always been, I want to thrive. I don't just want to survive in this world.
Mm.
I don't want to go through life every day just dragging and just trying to survive. I want to thrive and have joy and love and happiness and be
And
excited about what I'm
all of
doing.
that all of that stems from your mental health and your ability to,
Exactly.
because literally it affects everything in your life. It affects your ability to function in daily life.
Yeah.
We've all heard about debilitating anxiety that prevents people from interacting with the world, or debilitating depression that prevents you from getting out of bed in the morning, or any of those things.
Uh,
And all of that stems from, you know,
I experienced that
yeah,
in
yeah.
year 2 of grief. But yeah, I think too that, like, it's such a thing that we're super passionate about. We really feel strongly about, and it does affect us when we talk about this stuff. So, like, it
But we
wouldn't
both have our own healthy coping mechanisms and things that we do in our personal lives that help us to be able to talk about
to
these things in a
right.
productive manner.
Yeah, and
Now,
we couldn't
I
have I was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
we couldn't have a podcast and be able to tell this story if we're literally breaking down every 2 seconds. Now, I
Hmm.
will say, for me personally, I can compartmentalize. I talk, we go through the story. When I am done recording a session, I can tell it affects me. I'm drained. Uh, Sometimes I'm a little bit agitated. So there's still triggers. There's still things that hit you. Um, And then I have a harder time, like, sometimes watching such episodes back. So especially the last few where we've talked about just your dad's mental health, the state that he was in, how he felt about himself, how sad he was, like, all that stuff. That stuff is challenging for me because it literally still, I've said it several times, it breaks my heart to know that he felt like that he was struggling with that. Um that's harder for me to talk about.
The things
And
that are probably harder for me to talk about are, um, like, when it comes to, the physical aspects of like his death, and then even a lot of those moments of uh the the week that happened after, and the funeral, and like us seeing his body, and you know the aftermath, really. I would say that stuff doesn't I worked through that stuff fairly early on, about being able to like
yeah.
talk about that. I mean, they were obviously traumatic events, but the things that are hardest for me to talk about, and will actually be coming up fairly soon, is regrets in like how I personally treated him, because I didn't have the understanding that I wish I did, that I do now. Um, you know, I I at times wasn't the most pleasant towards my dad when he was going through, what likely was the hardest time in his entire life. And I didn't cut him a lot of slack, not as much as I should have. And and we'll get into it more, I think, next episode especially, but there's definitely and I know even in the last episode, I talked about it a little bit, but there's definitely things that I thought and things that I said that I very deeply regret and wish that I didn't because he didn't deserve it. Um and that I never would have if I would have known better. And those are the things that I think affect me the most because I loved him,
Yeah.
I cared about him, and uh to know that my words may have had an impact on him, or the way that I treated him probably had an impact on him negatively when he was already going through the hardest point in his life. That
Yeah.
hurts me.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll talk about that more in the next episode, and we have well we've talked about it a little bit, but we're gonna get there. I think we just really wanted to just address the fact that like we have a unique ability of being able to set our emotions aside for the most part to talk about this whole process and this whole story. We wouldn't have been able to do this 3 years ago, when we
Oh yeah.
first had this idea. It's been
No.
a journey. It's been an active, everyday, constantly working on, the grief, the emotional wellness, all of those things, processing our feelings. And when I say compartmentalizing too, it's important to remember that we compartmentalize during the episodes, but we release it afterwards. That's part of the healthy part, right? Like, we don't
Hmm.
hold on to that and then just ignore it and pretend like we don't feel
Bottle
those
we
things, like
don't bottle it up and let it. Yeah,
mhm,
that's the part of that gets draining, is when people tend to compartmentalize, but then they don't revisit those feelings, and then they
yeah.
bottle it up and bottle up, and then it shows up elsewhere at some point.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so
It will come out if you
even
don't deal with
yeah,
it.
well, and even my friends and stuff too, like, the sometimes there's been a common theme of like, oh, I talk about this and how it's affected me a lot. And part of that is my way of processing, but it's also
Mhm.
like most people don't talk about these things and how they really affect them. And
We should
uh
be.
and we should be. And I can speak firsthand to how it is such a release to be able to be vulnerable in a free way in a safe environment. Um and that's how I manage to be happy, is because I do have people, and I have ways of talking about the things that are bothering me that are healthy, and that don't put it on other people. It's not like you're trying to put your problems on other people, um but being able to just talk and like um and have those feelings. That's the biggest thing, is being having people around you where you can just have those feelings, and nobody's going to judge you for it. They don't
Yeah.
make you feel bad for it. Like, that is a very powerful thing as well. And so I think this kind of conversation actually goes really well into what the next part of the story
Mhm.
about Eric is, which is right after detox and what happened. He got out of detox in December. You know, so over the next few months, kind of what happened with him and trying to resolve or trying
Yeah.
to heal after all the things that we had
Yeah.
gone through.
And yeah, right before we'll jump right into that, picking him up from a detox, but just to add on to what you just said, um, it is important to release those emotions, to have a safe space to talk about them. It's also, I think, really important for people to recognize, and this is part of this journey and talking about our experience with this loss. It doesn't go away. Like, the
Hmm.
loss, the grief, it
It's
doesn't go
always there.
away.
Mhm.
You like, literally, I think there's not 1 second that Eric is not in the back of my mind. It I think about him all the time. I think
Mhm.
about everything all the time. So it doesn't go away. And I do think that sometimes people think that talking about it or bringing it up makes it worse. And like, oh, that's going to make you so sad. I don't want to make people sad. I don't want to remind them. And it's a misconception, a myth. It's something that a lot of people who have experienced this type of loss will tell you, that when people won't talk about that person, it is actually worse.
It's
It's worse.
isolating. It makes you feel isolated, um and like I had said in a previous episode, like sometimes it's just nice to be seen, you know,
Yeah.
to have somebody say, I see what you're going through, I see all of these things, and also on that same point of, like, I was saying, I have friends that I can talk about these things freely with, and they don't judge me for having, those emotions about it. Also be that type of friend. Be that friend
Yeah.
for other people, be a friend who's born for distress. Be somebody who, you know, people can come to you, and because that's what true friendship is. It's not just the people that you have good times with, and that you goof around, and you do dumb stuff, and whatever. It's the people that you can rely on in your life, and who will be
Mhm.
there for you when you're having a hard time, and who will just listen, and they won't judge, and they know you're not putting your problems on them, or at least not trying to. Um, but they're there to offer their support, and an ear to
Yeah.
listen, a shoulder to cry on, you know. And so if you're in that position to be that friend, because you have no idea the impact that has on other people.
Yeah. And I do think it makes again, going back to the grief part, and um there is this sense of, and I think we talked about it very early on in the podcast, there's this sense of like, people have this idea that like you go through this certain stages and then like you're done, and then people don't bring up that loved one anymore. People don't say their name. People don't want to talk about it because they're afraid it's awkward or it's going to be weird. Um and then what it does to somebody who is grieving that loss, whether it's a spouse, a child, a parent, anyone who's an integral part of your life, having that type of loss, when you stop talking about that person, or when, not like you, like we want to talk about that person, but when other people stop talking about that person, it almost feels as if they never existed. And that is an extremely painful thing to feel. So that's just a little like tangent. And when Isaac says be that friend, also um recognize there's two things to think about. One, recognize your boundaries though. So like if there's
Hmm.
something that isn't good for your own mental health, you have to have those boundaries in place with people. And then also two, yes, it is important to talk about your feelings and to be able to have that safe space to um, discuss things that are emotionally affecting you. However, your friends are not your therapists. They are
Right.
not your mental health professionals. So they're there to support you. But if you are only dumping emotionally on your friends
Oh
and
yeah.
not
No.
proactively working on your mental health in other ways, as in seeing a professional to help you move forward to process that stuff in a healthy way, then it becomes a more toxic codependent situation. So there's a
Right.
fine line between that. So just, those are things to just keep in mind as you're
Yeah.
thinking about those things.
Yeah, and when I talk about that, it's not like I'm dumping on my friends all the time. It's just I
No.
feel
Yeah.
safe. What I mean by that is, I feel safe to mention my dad, or mention something that's affected me,
Hmm.
or if I'm having a bad day and I'm around my friends or whatever, I don't feel like I have to put on a front with
Pretend.
them
Yeah.
and pretend
Yeah.
that everything's okay when it's not. And that's all I
Right.
mean by that. It's like, it's not like I'm going around and you know dumping all of my problems on my friends, and like
No. And
that's problematic. But um but if you can be that friend where,
mhm.
don't be the friend where, somebody's having a bad day and you avoid them because you don't want it to bring you down. That's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
A
And
true
again,
friend, you know,
yeah.
will be there on your bad days just as much as they love you on
Mhm.
your good days, you
Yeah.
know,
And I
and vice
think that
versa.
yeah, I think that with any healthy relationship, um, there's a saying that healthy relationships have boundaries. So as long as you
Hmm.
understand what your boundaries are and your friends understand what the boundaries are and everybody's got their things. Everybody's got their triggers, their things that they can't deal with. They're not the best person maybe to talk to about certain things because it's not good for them or vice versa. I mean, you figure that out in your own friend group or your support system, but healthy people have boundaries. And so
Hmm.
again, it just all comes back to doing that work for yourself, but then also surrounding yourself with those people like Isaac's talking about who you don't have to put on a face if you're just having a rough day. And also, you're not expecting people to fix it for you. Like you can't fix
Yeah.
grief. It doesn't go away. Sometimes you just are sad and it's
Mhm.
okay. It's okay to be sad. Um
You know,
so
I, I also just want to share something that I saw recently about like grief as a whole, and I thought it was fairly profound, which is um, grief is just love that can't be expressed anymore. When you
yeah.
lose somebody and you're
Mm,
grieving them, all of those feelings is all the love you had for that person that you can no longer give them.
yeah.
And I thought that that was a very
Ugh,
profound, just a profound thing to think about. Of when you lose somebody, all the love that you would have given them over the years to come, and all the love that you had for them, no longer has anywhere to go, and then it presents
yeah.
itself as sadness and as
Yeah.
loss. And I thought
Mm.
that, yeah, I just thought that was a very
That's pretty profound. It ties
mhm.
into also why it's so important to not stop, like to allow people that space to talk about them.
Because that's the thing, is like when I talk about my dad, even though sometimes it might make me feel a certain way, all it is me trying to show my love for him because I can't show it to him anymore.
Yeah,
So I have to share it with other people.
exactly. Okay, so he goes through detox. We're gonna jump into it now.
Right. Right. So on 45 minutes in, and we're gonna jump into
Yeah.
to finally finish, continuing the
W-
story. But
welcome,
um
welcome to our TED Talk. Thank you.
uh,
No,
so after detox, you brought him home.
yeah, so he was there, and like I said, you and I can't. Neither of us can remember if it was 3 or 5 days. I don't. It was no longer than 5 days. It was a very weird time, very strange. For I don't for both of us, but for me, I know I had mentioned just not being able to talk to him. Obviously, like this bombshell was dropped, and because of the seriousness of it, it was like bomb dropped, immediately put into detox so he could safely withdraw from alcohol, but couldn't have any contact with him. And so it's a whole week of what the heck just happened? Like, again, kind of like at the beginning when he died, it's this like shock of like,
Shock and
what?
reeling, and you're left reeling and trying to figure out what just
And when
happened.
we oh, go ahead. I was like when we went to visit him, it was like we said, it was weird.
Mhm.
It He obviously was very much in the middle of withdrawing, and
So
there was a
let's
lot of
let's
unspoken stuff, so it was weird. So we had, so that whole week was just a very strange week.
mhm.
So we go pick him up.
So let's Yeah, let's jump in. So I don't. Yeah, I think you went and picked him up by
I did by
yourself.
myself. Yep.
And I don't. I honestly don't remember. I really don't remember much of what happened in the immediate aftermath after detox and whatnot. I do remember. Um, I already still kind of had a lot going on in my life, so I kind of focused a lot on my friends and like my uh you know maybe trying to distract myself from a lot of what was going
Yeah.
on at home. And I do remember, you he was going to jump right back into going to work. Like he was like, "Oh, we need money. We need to go back to work." And you kind of put your foot down and were like, "No, you're gonna take some time off. You are not."
Yeah.
So why don't you
Well,
talk about kind of what kind of your ultimatums with him regarding the next steps? Talk about him taking the
yeah.
time off of work and kind
We
of
gotta
focusing
stop.
on certain things.
Yeah, we gotta stop because someone just knocked on my door, and I don't know if you could hear it. Give me a few
I didn't, but
seconds.
okay. My mom ditched me. So I might leave this part in, I might not. We'll see. But if I do, just know that's what happened. She left for no reason. Um, didn't even say goodbye. She'll be gone forever, I guess. So I guess I'll just continue the podcast by myself. Um, Probably going to cut a lot of this out. I probably won't keep it in. This whole episode has kind of gone really off topic. So um, probably wouldn't even be that weird for me to keep it in. But um, apparently someone was at her door. I'm guessing, it could be a whole lot of things. You know, uh, it's probably some unsavory folks, uh, or could be an ice cream man, delivering some ice cream, probably food to be honest, or one of her bajillion Amazon packages. Who knows? Who knows? Um, Maybe it's just a good Samaritan that found her dogs on the side of the road because they got out somehow. Who knows? I'm sure that's not the case, but we'll see what's going on. Oh, looks like she's back and she's smiling, so it must have been a good thing. But we'll see. I don't know if we'll keep that in or not.
Maybe we will. I heard your commentary because I still had my earbud in.
Okay, well,
um, so yes, he wanted to go back to work right away when he got out of detox. And I think again that was just his own brain thinking, okay, I detox off alcohol, it's out of my system, I'm fine. I can go back to work. And again, me having a lot more experience with it for various reasons, um, I was like, nope, absolutely not. This is not, you can't go back to work because, uh, about he had a couple more weeks off after detox, but then he would have started back up and gotten back into his regular grind, which at that particular time was travel out of state Monday through Friday. So he was in a big project where he was gone Monday through Friday, and he spent a lot of time alone. So not only was he actually like having to be social and doing, working with clients and customers, all of that, but then also he was in a hotel room alone all the time by himself outside of that. And um clearly he has crossed over into alcohol addiction. And I think it was very obvious that it was like, this is not going to work for you to just go back to work and act like nothing happened. Like that's just not how this works. Um so yeah, I did put my foot down around you have to take time off from work. Um and he did he did. He talked to his boss, and I was actually really surprised, to be perfectly honest. He talked to his boss and he told him what was actually going on. Not just I need to take time. I mean, he had in his job, like I said before, he was highly regarded. Uh,
Everybody
I
loved
mean,
him. Like
he could have asked
he
for the
had,
moon and they would have gave it to him.
I
So
think, I think, I
he
mean,
did
everybody loved him. He had people from all over the country at his funeral from his job. Like
yeah,
his
which we
direct
talked about,
boss and
yeah.
his boss's boss both like
Mhm.
adored him. You
Yeah.
know,
And I think um like literally he could have asked for the moon and they probably would have gave it to him. He So he didn't have to tell them. He didn't have to tell his boss what was going on. He could have just said, "I really need to take some personal time." Um, and I believe he took about a month off, after he, uh not just after he finished detox, but a month off after he would have normally gone back to work. So it ended up being like a month and a half that
Yeah,
he was
because he
off
had like
work.
the because he got
Yeah.
off detox, and then it would have been like the Christmas, New Year's kind of time off that he would have had,
Yeah,
and then so he didn't go back to work until like the very end of January, I think.
exactly. Exactly. And so because I was just like, here's the thing is uh you there's two options. Like the detox is the first step. This isn't fixing you. Um Clearly there's an issue, and clearly you're dealing with anxiety, clearly you're dealing with depression. They're probably at the root of what's going on with you. And you just jumping right back into work is not going to fix this problem. We're going to be right back where we just like where we just came from. Um, and so I did. So he took the time off from work. Very surprised. He told his manager, his boss, like truthfully what was going on. And I don't know if there was like a piece of him in the back of his head that was like, I just need to start maybe putting some accountability parameters in place. Um, and the other person that he told during that time in his job was um an account manager. That so like in his job he was like a tech, a service tech. His job was the more technical aspect of caring for the customer. And he worked
And he
in
also a
like
supervisor as well.
that was like before
Oh,
this particular job. He he was like a consultant essentially, is probably the easiest way to put it, but like his was more on the technical aspect of it. So like he worked with the clients who were already customers of this company. And his job was to ensure that technically and chemically and all that stuff that like their stuff, their product came out the way it yeah, came out the way it was supposed to. So in his line of work, he also was partnered with an account manager who was the sales part of it. They were the people that were continuing to sell that particular product for the company, build those relationships with the clients, bring on those accounts, etc. So he worked very closely with his account manager. They were basically like a team. They worked all of the accounts together, but in different functions. So not only did he tell his boss, but he also told his account manager, who he was pretty close to, like to the point where like they had a client that was up northern Minnesota that was close to where his account manager lived or had a cabin or something, and they used to go fishing all the time together. So like he told him as well, and I think it was sort of like a built-in accountability, in the back of his mind, thinking, if these two people who I trust at work know that I'm struggling with this, obviously I'm gonna be less inclined to like drink.
you have
Um,
somebody else to keep you
who's aware,
accountable. Yeah,
right?
some safety
Um,
measures per se.
yeah, some safety mechanisms. Um, so he obviously, again, I think these were just all signs that he recognized that this was out of control and that this was something he wasn't going to be able to fix on his own. So I don't recall him putting up a big fight on that whole having to take time off either. Um, so yeah, I think he really was. I think he really was kind of scared actually of what
Mhm.
was going on with him.
Well, I'm sure he learned a lot in detox as well about kind of what really the problem was, because like we
Some
kind of
stuff,
mentioned, when
yeah.
you go through that, you meet with doctors, you meet with psychiatrists, you meet with a few
Yeah,
different
it's not
types of people in detox. It's not just getting you off the substance. Like, they teach you about what's going on, and so I'm sure he learned a lot about kind of what had happened to him, or like what had happened
Yeah.
within his
Well, and
addiction.
they set you up with resources because again,
Right.
detox does not it's not rehab, it's not
Right.
an aftercare. It's literally just to get that
Hmm.
substance out of your system. Um,
So
so
then,
then
go ahead.
so then my other thing with him was I knew he wasn't going to go to an inpatient rehab facility. Like it just he wasn't going to do it. I know he wouldn't. Um but he also needed help and I also knew that um he wasn't just going to be able to will himself to stop drinking. Like there were underlying things as we've talked about extensively that contributed to this like slippery slope, the spiral down, right? And and I'm going to say that my personal opinion based on lots of experience in my own life and seeing people deal with this type of disease in my medical profession, seeing people deal with this type of disease, it is my opinion that the road to recovery and health is not a one size fits all. There are a lot of people who benefit from things like AA, inpatient rehab, all of those types of like programs that they have out there for them. Um, but I don't subscribe to the idea that those are the only ways to treat this problem.
Well, I mean, there's a
Um,
reason. There's a reason why there's, you know, a ton of different options. I mean, they set you a lot of, even at the hospital, like we set you up with like a whole resource book. If you want it for there's detox, there's rehab, there's social work, there's tons and tons of resources, and everybody kind of has to go on their own path. But like,
yeah,
whether it's dealing with just a one-on-one therapist and a psychiatrist, or like, dealing with a psychologist, which is different, or doing AA and rehab, or sometimes AA is good because you build a community of people who kind of keep each other accountable. But there,
yeah,
just like anything in life, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of different ways to come to the same
right.
outcome.
Yes.
It's
And
not,
I do think, yeah. And so
everybody is different.
everybody is different, and what sobriety looks like is different for everyone. Um, so I didn't subscribe to that, like, he has to go to AA and he has to go to a inpatient rehab facility, he has to do all these things. I also knew he wouldn't do it, right? So, like, could you imagine your dad going to an inpatient rehab? He just wouldn't have done it.
Hmm.
Um, and so I gave him 2 choices, right? Because I knew he wasn't gonna do the one choice, but the other choice was the thing that I thought would help him the most. Um, so I said, "You have two choices. This is where we're at in this this process. Um, you can go to inpatient rehab while you take this time off and work a program, right? Like, get the help, work a whole program, be in a facility, be away from alcohol, do all of those things. Or we're gonna get you into start seeing a therapist, specifically again EMDR. There's a lot of reasons why I'm a very big fan of this particular type of therapy, specifically related to trauma. Um and they do other therapy too. It's it doesn't just start with EMDR. It's a process. But when you get to that point where you're um doing the actual EMDR processing, it's very, very helpful for trauma type stuff. And so I was like, I want you need to see a therapist. And I do think, the best option for you would be to see someone who specializes in EMDR. So when you get to that point, they can help you with that. And then the other thing was you have been severely depressed for the last year and a half. You obviously have an anxiety issue. You're dealing with insomnia because the summer before he died, we did that sleep study. We knew that he had issues with sleep deprivation. You have all these things going on. We need to get those balanced out. It's not going to fix itself at this point. So the other thing was, in addition to seeing a therapist, I need you to go to a psychiatrist and I want you to get on medication. I want you to address the depression and the anxiety and start dealing with that stuff and being medicated for it so that his chemical balances could get evened out, because that's the other thing, is that alcohol, as we've talked about before, is a depressant. So his chemicals were completely out of whack, like in his brain, in terms of dopamine and serotonin and like all the things that help you regulate your mood and all those things. So I gave him the two choices, and I knew he wasn't going to do inpatient rehab, which honestly I did not think was the best option for him anyway. Um, because I think, as I still, in my opinion, believe, the root of majority of addiction is rooted in trauma and, not taking care of your mental health. So he chose the therapy and he chose the psychiatrist, which I figured that's what he would do. And personally, that's what I thought was best for him, knowing him as well as I did. So after detox, we got that all set up. Very fortunate in the sense that he was able to get started fairly quickly within a couple weeks. Um, at least with the therapist, I think it took a little, maybe another week or two, another week or so to get in with the psychiatrist to start getting on medication. Um, and the downside, I will say, is that unfortunately, with medication, especially when you're dealing with depression and anxiety and things like that, but specifically depression, antidepressants and those types of medications can take anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks before you start to feel the full effects. It's another reason why people get frustrated with mental health medications and try them and then stop them, because they're like, I've been doing it and it's not helping me. It's not an instant gratification thing. You're not able to balance those chemicals out quickly. um, and unfortunately, I believe he started the medication towards the end of January. So he January? No, he was in, it might have been early February. End of January, early February, that he was finally put on medication, because it takes a little while to get these appointments, right? And you got to remember it was over the holidays too that all this happened. So we had there's a little delay there. Um and unfortunately, I do think that he died before he got to feel the full effects of how those medications probably would have helped him. Um, which again just makes the whole thing more tragic.
Yeah. Well, he was, despite all that, like, obviously he was sober for, 2 months. He went to detox and he was sober for, you know, December, January into February, and he was doing a lot better. Like, we were starting to see the
Mhm.
Eric that we knew come back. Like, um, you know, part of the whole thing that prompted us to or prompted me even to address things in the first place is because, like I said, he wasn't acting like himself anymore. And so
Right.
we were slowly starting to see the version of Eric that we knew and loved so much coming back. He was starting to do better. He was, I think he was generally starting to. He was working really hard. I think he was generally starting to see all of the things that were going on in his life that needed to be addressed, and he was working very, very hard um to address those and try to fix them. Like,
Yeah.
he was trying so hard. He was doing, therapy, and um he
And you
was
got to
working
remember
with us with the
this,
medications. And
yeah, and you got to remember this is a man who literally thought mental health was all in your head, was stupid, didn't exist
Man up and
and
deal with
was the
it.
most and was the most stubborn person you have ever met in your entire life. And he's doing these things and he's starting to see how they're helping him.
Mhm.
Um, and we
And,
had
you know,
various
again,
conversations where he would talk about things that like he was learning from his therapist and these epiphanies he was having, which was a new Eric for me because again,
yeah.
like he didn't talk about that kind of stuff, in general
Well, for the
when it
for the first time, I think in his entire life, he realized, you know, he was starting to self-analyze and you know, that process of I think that we talked about in the last episode of he was starting to understand himself better, which then ultimately was helping him realize where he was going wrong and what things were problematic in his life. And
yeah,
it was all on the up and up. Things were doing so he was doing a good job. You know, we were
he
starting to get the
was.
Eric that we knew back. Life was normalizing a little bit. I mean, still obviously we were dealing with this, but like especially for me, I think because
Mhm.
being a teenager, I was back in school, I was back, to work. Um, I was in EMT school now in this new semester. I was back to work. I was back to hanging out with my friends. I knew that he was dealing with this some stuff, but I think also I was trying to like distract myself and like get away. But like him and I started doing some stuff together and hanging out and watching movies
Mhm.
like we used to. And it had been a while since we had really spent time together. So
Yeah.
things were getting better with
Yeah.
all of this work.
Yeah, it wasn't an overnight thing. And there was awkwardness that happened as well. But it slowly you slowly started to see this person that you recognized. He was coming
Mm.
back
It was an
and
interesting thing, you know, though, because you could still tell that the addiction had a grip on him.
oh yeah,
Um, because
absolutely.
he didn't, he still had this mentality of like, he still was, he was working on it. He was doing better, but he still had the mentality of, I can fix it myself. And he
Mhm.
still had this idea, like this focus on the alcohol side of it, of like, if I just get through this, then maybe, maybe down the road I can have some drinks with friends and I won't be that guy
Yeah.
who, who has to say that he's sober. Or maybe,
Yeah.
maybe I can still fix it and get back to my old way of life, right? He was still
Yeah.
kind of in that mentality too. So things were getting better, but it was still going to be a very long journey to get him to the point where he recognized that the way that he was living before and the way that he was using alcohol before um, was was problematic for him.
And
He
he
still
was
thought
going to
that he
have
could get
to
back.
yeah, that he was going to
He was
have to
going to have
make
to be
big
sober,
changes. And
right?
and and we don't know exactly what that journey would have turned out to be
Yeah, it got
because
cut very short, unfortunately.
and and I think that was actually a hard thing to process after he died was I don't I don't know. I don't know if
Things would have gotten
things
better, or maybe
would
way
have gotten
worse.
better or gotten worse or
And
you know,
there
yeah,
was definitely some fear. I think there was some relief. Um, that like I think both of us kind of felt guilty in some ways after he died because there was a little bit of relief of worry that things were gonna get a lot worse and that maybe our because
before
our
they got
fam
better.
I mean there was potential, and the reason there was potential that our family would have been torn apart by this, and the reason I say that is because about um he was doing better, but about 3 weeks before he died, so this would
Yeah.
have been towards the end of February. Um, I remember coming downstairs. I was packing up, getting ready to go to my friend's house for the weekend. It was a Friday or something. You were at work. Um, and things had been going good. He had been doing well, and I came downstairs and I went to say goodbye to him, and I could immediately tell that he was drunk.
You could smell it.
And well, it wasn't even that. It was
But yes, I mean,
he.
in addition.
I could immediately tell that he was drunk, and it was because he was in one of his episodes. And I confronted him. I said, "Have you been drinking?" And he said, "No, I'm just tired." And I said, "No, that's not going to work anymore. Like, don't lie to me. Have you been drinking?" And he denied it, and he denied it, and he denied it. But he was drunk.
Hey, you know how this works.
If you like this episode or just like us in general, you can find us at It's Going Podcast on all the things.
Don't forget to check out the links in the description.
And thanks for hanging out with us.